So the latest Warcry FAQ is out now. It came out yesterday, so the 26th of August 2025, and it's a pretty good document. However, unfortunately, there are some issues with this document that I do want to address before I get into making content that is purely positive. I went through this on my stream yesterday. You can see the VOD, it's still there. It's like 2.5 hours long of just pure Warcry rambles. It was a good time, and the general feeling of the early read-through of this FAQ was that it was very positive. There were some mistakes that me and chat all found out, going, okay, this is a bit odd. A few odd rune marks here and there, but overall, the content was solid. However, as time has went on, it's only been a day, but more people have viewed the document, and more things have come to light that this document is not quite up to snuff. And as you know, with my channel, I like to keep things fairly positive, try to keep things on the lighter end of things. However, when the content we've been given is sort of subpar, right? The content, like overall the content is good, but the way it's being delivered is not the best. I always want to address some of the big ones here, just so you can be on the lookout and how I would rule these if I was a TO. This will not be a fully comprehensive list because, as we'll see in a little bit, there is a lot that is not quite right here, and it'll take a long time to really comb through everything and find all the little issues. I am hoping that a hot fix is on the way. If not, we are aware another FAQ is on the way thanks to the Warcry article that should come with the Hellsmiths of Hashut, and that should hopefully iron out any issues. If you have spotted issues I haven't noticed in this video, let me know in the comments down below. I'm currently gathering as much information as I can at Certain Games Workshop to hopefully get this fixed as soon as possible. But without further ado, let's get into the things that are wrong. And the one that I spotted immediately when I was doing my stream was Pygeist. Their reaction immolation is finally Pygeist have a reaction. That's all good. This reaction is also quite good if it was to work properly. And basically, when your fighter dies, you can react and then you get to cremate, and cremate allows you to place pyre tokens. So now your guys can become pyre tokens when they die, and they can kill people to make pyre tokens when they use their abilities. So you get more pyre tokens, and this combos very nicely with their battle trait where they get more wild dice, more or less equal to the amount of pyre tokens that they have on the board. And of course, you also control small amounts of space because those pyre tokens also do damage. So this is a really good change for the Pygeist. However, things aren't quite as they seem, as the wording of this reaction is not quite right. I'm going to highlight it with this little highlighter tool here just to make it a bit more obvious. So you react after the damage is totaled, but before it is allocated to this fighter, if it is enough to be taken down. So you react before you die. Okay, that's a big one. And then you cremate this fighter. Now, you'd think that cremate would take you down, right? Because, of course, it would. However, I'll put it on screen now. Cremation does not take you down. It removes you, okay? At no point does cremate or this reaction kill you. You are removed before you die, right? As the reaction happens before the death happens. So you cremate before you die. Cremate doesn't kill you. You are kind of boned there. So when it comes to kill missions, you don't count as kill points. If you immolate, you don't count as a kill point. Additionally, because you are not dead, technically, you also can't be revived. Right? So if you have a Nighthaunt hero in your warband as an ally who is going to, use spectral summoning to bring back your guys, if you immolate, rules as written, you can't resurrect that immolated fighter because they're not actually taken down. This is very similar to how Split works for Tzeentch, and that is an equally as awkward ability that breaks all kinds of Warcry rules, but that's very intentional. I don't think immolation is intentional. As a result, for me, when it comes to immolation, I would rule this as basically you are meant to be taken down. That cremate is meant to kill you, and that means you are still scoring kill points, and of course you can still be revived. I don't think that it's intended at all for immolation to basically make the Pygeists almost unbeatable in kill missions because you just can't kill them, right? That's ridiculous. I don't think that's how that's intended. And a big thing I think with the rulings I'm going to try and push here for my tournaments, if I was to run a tournament, would be that I'm trying to encourage people to play Best Cry and not play Sweat Cry. You can absolutely run this as written, but I don't think you would make any friends. And again, if you wanted to run it that way, absolutely run it by your TO, run it by your opponent first, because this is a very unpleasant interaction that I don't think anyone's really going to be happy with if you were to run it directly as written. So bear that in mind. You can if you want to, but for me, I wouldn't. I would rule this as cremate does actually take you down, and hopefully that does come through in a future FAQ to actually make that a rules as written amendment, right? The next little awkward bit I noticed were for these guys, okay, Carnavix and her warband, and it's all to do with the prophecy points. So the actual offerings of foresight, is very straightforward. You roll some dice, you gain prophecy points up to a maximum of 6, and they will last for the rest of the game or until you use them. And you use them on your triple of Ritual of Prophecy, and the first bit and the second bit are really simple. You just gain up to 6 movement or up to 6 toughness. The first one's pretty good, the second one's less of an issue. However, this third one has caused a little bit of an issue because of the wording. So immediately allocate your, I'll highlight this because I do that. So immediately allocate your prophecy points as evenly as possible between attacks, strength, and both values of damage characteristic of their melee weapon. Add 1 to each for each prophecy point allocated to it for the rest of the activation. Now, my issue with this is, and a lot of people's issue with this is that it's not entirely clear if the damage characteristics both increase with 1 prophecy point, or you have to spend a prophecy point on damage and crit separately. Now, my understanding is that this bit here is that 1 point will increase both. Okay, so basically you spend 1 point to gain +1 attack, another point for +1 strength, and another point to gain +1 damage and +1 crit simultaneously. And the reason for that is that Games Workshop have never actually written damage characteristics in this manner. If they wanted to split them up, they would not have this and here, and they would list damage and critical damage separately as they always do. Because they've got the and here, and then follow that immediately with both these values lumped together, to me that indicates that you increase both on 1 point, and mechanically this also feels much nicer simply because when you are buffing your stats, if you have 6 points and you spend 4 points to go +1 attack, +1 strength, +1 damage, +1 crit, you have 2 points left over that don't cleanly fill in, right? However, if you do it this way where you get +1 to your hit and crit on 1 point, it means when you spend 6 prophecy points, you are gaining +2 to every stat. And that is much cleaner, and also I think it's supported just by the wording. The wording is a little bit ambiguous, and ideally we will get some sort of FAQ update or hotfix that will clarify what this means. But if I was to TO this, I would have it that if you were to spend 6 prophecy points, you would gain +2 strength, +2 attacks, +2 damage, and +2 crit. And I think the wording leans more to that interpretation than the other, and it also feels nicer, it feels cleaner, which I'm always going to lean towards when it comes to an interpretation. Next up we have Galen Ven Denst, and this seems to be a rune mark issue. So if we look at their abilities, they've got 2 abilities, Banishment and Judgment, with Banishment being a fairly solid double, where you gain +1 damage on hit and crit to missile attack actions on both of their shots if they fire twice. And this goes on Doralia, and she has a very specific rune mark. Now Galen has, I believe this is the Berserker rune mark, and Order of Vizier do not have any Berserker rune mark abilities, which is a little bit weird. Galen is also more expensive than Hanavatol and Haskell Hexbane, but has worse stats and, a pointless rune mark. My thinking is that he's supposed to have this, I think that's the Frenzy rune mark, the same rune mark as Doralia, and so he would gain a buff to his range attack. Okay, so going to a 3-4-2-4 on his pistol, and that would make him a fairly interesting pick, as would give him a fairly good shooting attack, unlike the other witch hunters within Order Vizier who have better melee profiles, right? However, we don't know. Okay, so for me, I wouldn't actually rule this as Galen having that ability, because it could just be that they forgot to add in, or there's an editing issue and they didn't fucking paste it in, and they just didn't put in his ability. He could actually have an ability that we don't know, and changing his rune mark might actually just completely bulk that up. So for me, I think just Galen Ven Denst is just not a playable character. He brings quite literally nothing but a cool model, and it is a shame. I would like to see, again, this be changed. So either add in his ability if he was due an ability, or change his rune mark. As of now, though, we don't know which it would be, and I wouldn't want to rule that to give Galen a new rune mark that he's not supposed to have. So in my opinion, just keep Galen as he is, basically as a useless but cool looking model. Then if we go down a little bit further, we have some more issues, and we have issues with the Ardent Flamehunter and her lads and lasses. So in general, this is a pretty funky warband for the Vanguard auxiliaries. This is pretty funky because they've all got pretty good stats. They're a little bit squishy in some places, but they're pretty spicy. And the real spice comes in with Farasa Thrice Risen, for she has your duty remains undone Farasa. And this is where rune marks, I think, are very clear as to what's supposed to happen here. So this ability is only usable by Farasa, and sadly, she will never be able to use it because you can only use it if Farasa's dead, and of course, you can't activate a fighter to use an ability if you are dead. And this is very clearly a rune mark error, because if you look at the champion rune mark and you look at the hero rune mark, they are almost the same fucking rune mark. This is very clearly the editor of this document accidentally putting in the wrong rune mark. The name of the ability is very clearly someone else reviving Farasa. It would make sense. It's Ardent Flame Runner. Let's be fair here. So for me, I would rule this as this rune mark is the hero rune mark. Ardent Flame Runner can revive Farasa Twice Risen, and that's how that's supposed to work, because currently Farasa cannot be revived at all, and it's fairly obvious due to the often rune mark. And it's fairly obvious because Gamers Workshop do tend to mess up their rune marks, especially when so many rune marks look the same. For example, Champion and the Hero rune mark, which I'll just highlight here for people who aren't aware. So this is the Champion rune mark, and this is the Hero rune mark. They are very similar. At a distance, you will likely think they are the same rune mark. It's a common mistake. We've seen it happen before. I think that's a very simple change, a very simple ruling, and that's how this will get changed if we get a hotfix. On to the next one, we have Crowjax, the Aegis, Hisoka, and Rotak, and these are actually pretty good. I like Crowjax a lot. He is 240 points, which is very expensive when you compare him to the likes of Stormcast, like an Annihilator Prime or a Reclusian Prime. However, he has more wounds. He's also faster than one of those guys. And he has some other things like Tearing Bite. So you've always got to factor this in, right? That people think Crowjax is too expensive. He isn't. He is a very strong Saurus with access to 4 attacks and Tearing Bite. He can go to 5 attacks with a Blessing, right? So 5 attacks and Tearing Bite with his profile is actually disgusting. Crowjax is an absolute beast, undeniably so. But that's not why we're here, because all of his warband's good. We're here because of Dedicated Guardian, and Dedicated Guardian, oh no, oh no, oh no. There's a little formatting issue I think we can see here. Like this doesn't seem right. Basically, this means this ability, Dedicated Guardian, allows Crowjax to target himself, because until the end of the battle round, friendly fighters with the Hero rune mark and the Joseph Itzel rune mark cannot be targeted while they're within 1 inch of this fighter. This fighter does not exclude Crowjax himself, and because Crowjax has the Warrior rune mark, as we can see here, Crowjax can use this on himself. He's also a hero, and he's also a Son of Itzel, or whatever they're called. So he can target himself, and then he can then become untargetable. So on a double, he can become untargetable by everything, not just melee attacks, right? Most abilities reference targeting, okay? So most abilities will not target Crowjax. You cannot shoot Crowjax, and you cannot hit him in melee. So on a double, Crowjax is immortal, which is outstanding, and of course not how this is meant to be done, because very clearly these are Temple Guard, right? Sokar and Rotak are Temple Guard. It's very clearly meant to be the Bulwark rune mark. Okay, they're meant to protect Crowjax. Currently they can because they have the ability, right? However, it doesn't make sense. You would always just use Crowjax on that, because then Crowjax just can't be killed. So that's an error, very clearly. If I was to rule this at a tournament, I would never allow a player to do this on Crowjax. I would never allow Crowjax to use this on himself. This is clearly not intended. This is another rune mark issue. This should definitely be the Bulwark rune mark, and that is very clearly just a bit of a guff. We don't have immortal characters because that is clearly not how the game is meant to be played. And if you try to play it this way, nobody is going to be happy. And again, I want people to play the best games of Warcry they possibly can, and not to just be massively sweaty and run things that are very clearly unintended and very clearly broken, right? So no model should be immortal, and this is very clearly an oversight. Moving on to, this is more of a clarification than an error. So the MacLeod and Nurgle got a whole new ability. So they got basically the Virulent Discharge ability is being removed entirely, and it's been replaced with Spurting Mucus. And there's been a little bit of a debate as to whether this is actually working correctly or how it's supposed to work, but to me it's very, very clear. So Spurting Mucus is very clearly meant to be a means to weaponize Nurgle mortals' very high wound pool, right? That's what it's there for. And so it's until the end of the battle round. Each time an enemy fighter is allocated a damage point by a melee attack action by that enemy fighter, roll a dice. On a 3+, allocate 1 point to that fighter. So how people are wrongfully interpreting this ability is that you only roll 1 dice ever, and you will only do 1 damage ever. That is not true. And that is because of this little thing here. Each time this fighter is allocated a damage point. So when you take damage in Warcry, so let's say I had a Vexmore and I hit you for 5 damage, you wouldn't take 5 damage all in one go. You would take 1 damage 5 times or until you die, right? That's how that would work. And so in this case, each time you take damage, so every point of damage you take, you would roll a dice. So if you were to take 15 damage on this Harbinger, for example, who has 25 wounds, I would roll 15 dice and you could take 15 damage back. Is that powerful? Yes, it is very, very powerful, but also it's not broken. So the initial thought is, wow, this guy can just kill me back with this amazing double that lasts the rest of the battle round. Yes, he could. But of course, the counter is to not attack. There are instances, of course, where this is just incredibly powerful. For example, in treasure missions where you have to attack the treasure carrier, Nurgle mortals become very tricky to kill because you have to attack, therefore you'll be taking damage from Spurting Mucus, and that's a sad time. A key thing to note as a little balancer to Spurting Mucus, though, that I think some people may overlook, is that you can't do more damage than the wounds you have, right? Because you stop being allocated damage points once you run out of wounds. So again, if this Harbinger of Decay with 25 wounds took 40 damage, right, from a Gut Lord, the Gut Lord would not roll, you would not roll 40 dice back on the Gut Lord, you would actually just roll 25. Okay, you can't roll more dice than your wounds remaining, and that's assuming that this goes at full wounds, right? So if you only have 6 wounds left, you will only ever be able to roll 6 dice before you die. Okay, and that's how that would work as well. This is a very strong ability. This is more of a clarification of how it works and not like this is an error. No. This is very much a clarification. And so if you were unaware or were confused on how it works, this is how it works. It is potentially very strong and it's definitely working as intended in my opinion. So just bear that in mind. Moving down to the next little confusion, we have Tick Tick. So Tick Tick's great. He's a little bomb rat, right, with the worst, I think the worst stat to point ratio in the whole game by a long margin. However, Tick Tick's amazing because he explodes. But Tick Tick also has a revival ability. So everyone can do this. It's called Tick Tick Tick. If your Tick Tick is taken down and is listed on your warband roster, okay, you set up a friendly Tick Tick within 1 inch of this fighter. and that tick cannot move this turn. So people are a bit confused because this looks to be a revive. It is not a revive, okay? So a revive in Warcry frequently references this fighter. If you know, pick a fighter that was taken down this battle round, that fighter is no longer classed as being taken down. Okay, you are literally reviving the same guy who just died. This is not the case with Tick. Okay, this is a completely fresh and new and unique Tick. Okay, he's not even being revived. Okay, so he means you can actually activate Tick after his pseudo revive and go again. Think of Tick on Tick as split and not a revive. Okay, it's much closer to a split. And how it works, if you revive, with heavy quotations, if you revive Tick can activate as per usual. If Tick was to die like 5 times in one turn, and you had 5 doubles, you could revive Tick 5 times, and he could activate all 5 times. Okay, which is very strong, for the record. It is very strong, but this is not a revive. Okay, so you need to get that out of your mind and go, oh well, we're reviving Tick. No, you are literally summoning a new model. This has obviously benefits to the Skaven player in many ways, because you can have Tick explode with kaboom. Okay, you can kaboom and just blow up. This does actually kill Tick, and then bring a new Tick out, and then blow that Tick up again, and do this multiple times in one turn, and many times over the course of a game. The downside, of course, is that these are still being taken down. So every time a Tick dies, you are actually giving your opponent kill points. So bear that in mind. That's one negative. And they don't get removed when you make a new Tick. Okay, so you can very quickly generate more kill points than you actually have models in your warband and points you have in your warband. So reviving, and well, pseudo-reviving Tick over and over again might actually lose you the game just from you losing too many points. Okay, but also it means that Tick, there's no point in blessing Tick. If you were to give Tick plus 4 wounds blessing, when he dies, okay, this first Tick who died, yeah, he would have 8 wounds. The next Tick is a different Tick. He would not, or he, she, it would not have the plus 4 wounds. It's a different Tick. So there's very little point in giving Tick blessings, because unlike usual blessings where you're reviving the same character with the blessings intact, you are not doing that with Tick. So that's how Tick works. Again, I think this is very intentionally worded to work this way. So bear that in mind. This is not a revive. Do not treat it like a revive. It has very little to do with actual revivals. This is a completely unique ability. Nothing works like this. The closest thing to it would be like something like Split, where you generate whole new models out of nowhere. So bear that in mind. But back to looking at errors and not just clarifications on balance, I guess. If we scroll down a little bit to the High Falconer Felgrin. High Falconer Felgrin is a potentially very powerful model. At 160, he's the cheapest trapper in the Flesh Echoes. That's a big deal because the Trapper rune mark allows him to teleport and teleport friends as well. It's one of the best teleports in the game. It's called the Winds of Shaiish, I believe, and it also is very cheap on a double. So High Falconer Felgrin, just for that teleport, is very tempting to take. And Eye Shred is almost worth taking. However, the issue with this is that we don't know how it works. So you pick a visible enemy fighter that will allocate any damage points to this activation by any of this fighter's missile attack actions. You then give that target a Gripe token. That target cannot score critical hits for the rest of the battle round, okay, whilst they have that token. This is really powerful, right? Pick anything that you don't want to crit, and crits are very powerful, so you know any really big Titan will not like being hit with this Gripe token, and it lasts till the end of the battle round. However, the token does not get removed automatically. The only way the token can be removed is if they were to basically heal. All of this, okay, is basically if they heal in any way, the token removes, and also you can't have more than one fighter with a Gripe token at any one time. So how this works is you do an ability that debuffs an opponent for 1 round, but then removes your ability for the rest of the game, because most people are not going to heal. If they're going to heal and remove this token, that's one, it's a tempo loss. Healing is typically not advised in Warcry. There are instances where you would do it, but it's also quite slow. And additionally, on top of that as well, you'd also not heal in this instance, and you would give them their token back, right? So they can then do it again. I don't know how to rule, simply because the ability could go one of 2 ways. Either the token is meant to last just a battle round, and the effect just lasts a battle round. Okay, so it would go away. So the effect and the token would the effect would fade away as written, and the token would come back to you at the end of the turn. Fine. Or the effect is meant to last all game, and the token is meant to be out all game. Okay, or until there's that heal. And I don't know which it's meant to be. I think just for safety and balance purposes, if I was to rule this, if anyone was to bring High Falcon or Felgrin, I would rule this as the token and the ability fade at the end of the battle round, so you can use it every turn. But again, this is an awkward one. I could see it going both ways, and this is entirely down to Games Workshop to fix this, because this is an absolute mess. This is a mess in ability that is potentially very cool, very thematic, quite powerful, but is currently basically unplayable. Hopefully that gets fixed as soon as possible. And that's the end of the rules clarification. The last little bit of clarification is basically all this. So I'm going to go through a few of them. So the bogus beast grabbers, we'll go up and go a bit more. We go to these guys, okay? So there's a lot of weirdness when it comes to this FAQ. Here we go, another one. That is basically, these aren't Bladeborn. Okay, these don't have any, there's no indication in this document that these are Bladeborn at all. So what this would mean, rules as written, if these aren't Bladeborn and they're working through potentially removing that system entirely, or going forward not adding to the system and instead just adding new things to your warband, it would mean that basically all these new additions, right, the new Stormcast stuff, the new Skaven, the new Plague Demons, all that stuff, these can't be allied out as Bladeborn. You can still take Zicket Rockno, right, in any Chaos Warband. You just wouldn't get much of an effect because he's not that great by himself. He really thrives with the rest of his warband. But you can't ally the rest of the warband in because these aren't Bladeborn, which is important to note. Will this get clarified in an FAQ in the future? Maybe, but there's a lot of wording in this FAQ that is very much faction locking, like a lot of these warbands to just operating within themselves. There's very little like outward, cool, well, if I take this model, then it'll buff, potentially unintentionally buff all these other things as in other warbands if I take it as an ally. There doesn't seem to be any of that in this warband. They all seem very self-contained, and to me, it looks like they are meant to just stay within faction. I would hold off on assuming that these are meant to be Bladeborn until we get actual clarification. Because these could just be additions, like a new way of adding models and just adding in named models into warbands. And again, we do have all this clarification that you can only include these named models once in your warband. So we're getting that as well to stop people taking, like, 15 ticks, right? So there are some Bladeborn based restrictions or just named based restrictions. We see this in Order of Azir and in Brand's Oathbound, and in Black Talons we have this only once sort of clarification there as well. But are these all Bladeborn? I don't think so. I would lean on the side of caution and take this as they're not Bladeborn, and they're meant instead to be a new way potentially of expanding in faction list building. But I don't know for certain, right? That's just what I would lean towards. I would tailor it that way as well, but I would not scoff at anyone who ruled the opposite. But I would not scoff at anyone who ruled the opposite until we get clarification on that. This is one of the weirdest changes to Warcry is this pseudo half Bladeborn inclusion with no text to really clarify that that was the intent. But we'll see how that pans out going forward. And finally, there's so much wrong. We've hit a bunch of just like issues here. I may have missed some already. But the final thing to look at, and this is the real kicker, right? So all these like little niggling issues in the document aren't too bad, right? They're fairly straightforward for pretty most of my obvious rulings to keep the game from falling apart, right? If you were to rule them, this is where things just fall apart massively, right? We can argue day and night what the fuck's all this about. This is a terrible change to the game. There's just no way that Dispossessed should get these points reductions. That's hilarious. The less I say about that, the better, right? But that is what it is. Things that we have that are kind of just odd. There are a lot of... I'm going to try and find one. Where's Seraphon? Seraphon are the easiest to find. So we have, of course, points changes. Okay, so we have, of course, in magenta, we have all these dispossessed things. So in magenta, they've got their new points values, got their delta changes, right? All very cool. But then we have these weird little half ones, right? Where they've magenta'd the points changes, but forgot to magenta this. So they're more easily missable. That's kind of sad, but it is what it is. But then we have Kixi Taka. Okay. Kixi Taka is not magenta'd, has no delta value at all, and is 145 points. Now, Kixi Taka is 130 points currently. So how in the world is anyone meant to even know, unless you play Kixi Taka on the regular and you are combing through this with a fine-tooth comb, which some people were, you would miss this, right? Like a regular Warcry player would miss this change. That Kixi Taka has went up 15 points without any indication that Kixi Taka has went up 15 points. That makes no sense at all. There's more. There is more. So if you go down to other ones I've noticed and have been pointed out, would be within... Is it Chaos? We'll find them. So Monsters of Chaos, here we go. The Mutalith Vortex Beast. 245 points. Okay. Again, no delta change at all. So this thing is 245 points. That is a 200 point reduction on the Mutalith Vortex Beast. For no reason, right? Like what? Why? It hasn't been pointed out in the delta. It's not in magenta. And it's a massive buff to the Mutalith Vortex Beast for no reason, right? Especially when all these other monsters are still wildly expensive. Okay? I don't get it. It makes no sense to me. What's going on there? Have they literally just made a typing error and put in the wrong number? I don't know. But there's also more. If we go down a little bit more, Kagra the Usurper. Again, not magenta, no delta. She is 5 points cheaper. I mean, I'm all fine with that. Kagra is a wonderful character. I'm happy to play Kagra at a cheaper value. But why is it not clear? Is this intentional? Have they just put in, when they've been typing it in, have they just put in the wrong numbers? Basically, my question is, have they literally went through this whole document and manually, instead of importing over the old point values, have they manually went through and inputted these all again and then made mistakes? Because that's what it looks like. That's what it looks like. There's more. This isn't all of them. Another one that jumps out to me as well. So the Briar Queen, 185. That's a 5 point reduction. No delta, no magenta. What's going on? No idea. There are more than I could find without really combing through this with a fine-tooth comb. Right, where there's just been some unusual and unannounced changes with no deltas, and how do players work with this? How are we meant to know what's meant to be a change? So how do tournament organizers pass all this? How do we go, right, this is how we're going to do it? How are we as a community meant to work with this points table? Because it's an absolute shambles, right? We can work with some weird wording. We can work with some obvious rune mark issues. Okay, those are issues, of course, but they are workable. They are fairly minor. But when it comes to just points changes, especially when they seem so arbitrary, how are we supposed to know if these are intentional? We don't, right? Most of destruction are half magenta, right? Brute bosses, gut lords, crushers, right? Ridiculous. From a purely editing perspective, this looks cheap. This is a badly done piece of work that someone has done. They have fucked up royally, is what they've done. So how would I do this? How would I rule this in a tournament? Okay, and how would I recommend people run this points table if they were to play Warcry going forward? For me, if there is no magenta, okay, so for example, the Mutalith Vortex Beast, Kexitaka, right, the Briar Queen, all these models, these have no magenta, okay? Ignore those changes for now. Until we get a document with these in magenta, I would ignore those changes because we have no idea what is going on. Right? That is unusual. It makes no sense. If they are full magenta or they are half magenta, then those changes I would say should go in because at least an effort has been made to make it stand out. At least to have put in the fecking delta value, right? So for me, if there's any magenta on this table, that is an intentional change. If there's not, that might just be someone messing up. That's how I would do that. And that really is just the FAQ all done and dusted. Like I said, I am not going to cover this again, I don't think. As a whole, I am very happy with this update. The actual content, the changes that have been made to counter the buffs, the new abilities that have been added in for different warbands, I am all for this. I'm even all for the introduction of a new kind of Bladeborn, pseudo-Bladeborn edition for list building. I'm all for that. I'm all for counter, okay? But it needs to be refined. We can't keep on getting these half-assed updates where the content, the core content is so good, but the execution is so poor. There has to be a proofreading process somewhere, and clearly this document did not get the proofreading it required, and it shows everywhere. It's like every other page, there's something to talk about, and that just isn't good enough. The only saving grace to the myriad issues within this document is that we know we're getting another document, another FAQ in the near future that will hopefully change more things, fix more things, and fix the issues in this current document because it's an absolute disgrace. Ideal scenario, we get a hotfix or something sooner. I would like to see the hotfix or something sooner instead of waiting for the Helmsmith of Hashut to drop, because from a quality control perspective, this is just a bad look for Games Workshop. It's a bad look for the game, even if the core content is real good, really interesting, and has opened up the game in so many new ways, so many cool and unique ways. The changes to the worst bespokes in the game, so they're now definitely playable. The changes to counter, which unleashes all of the unplayable elf factions into the game, so they can now actually play the damn game. The refinement of counter control, so only a few select warbands can effectively do it, is also pretty cool. And the changes to counter allows players to use more of their models, and more importantly, it incentivizes people to use their own reactions and their own rules instead of defaulting to the plain Jane counter. A bunch of reactions have indirectly gotten more powerful. A bunch of factions and models have gotten indirectly more powerful. This is a massive shake-up of the meta, and this is all good stuff because we haven't had an update in about a year. So these big shake-ups are exactly what the game needs. They just need to execute this better going forward, and they need to fix whatever the fuck's going on with the editing team. Get that fixed soon so our updates are as good and as clear as possible. But like I said, that's the end of this video and the end of my negative rants. Okay, going forward, I'm going to go through this FAQ in a much more positive light, looking at the cool new changes to Bespokes and really dive in that way. But I thought, you know, whilst the iron is hot, let's get all this negativity, all these clarifications out of the way now, so we can go forward with a clean slate and have fun absorbing all of this new content. If you liked what you saw in this video, let me know in the comments down below. And until next time, lads, ladies, and everybody in between and beyond, ta-ra. Groovy. Welcome to the post-toast credits. A massive shout out to all of my patrons and members, but an extra big shout out to my algorithmic demon slayers, Andy Morris, blah blah blah, Brioche, the Head Knight of Paint, Heinz D, Lord Fireaxe, Maps, Sable Saver, Steve Bean, the Houston Toad, and Velas. Thank you all for continuing to support this shit show of a channel, and I'll catch you all next time.